generally everyone who's successful, in my view, tends to understate the role of luck and and things turning out in their favor that they can't really control.
Mhm.
So I almost think of these just you could draw kind of a 2 by 2 consulting matrix, right? Of that goes like, was the decision a good decision or a bad decision inherently? And did the decision turn out well or did it not turn out well? And one of the things kind of going back to what we just talked about, being willing to take on some risks. It, Part of the willingness to take on risks is um, taking actions that may not turn out well, that have a lot of things in them that you can't control. So I'm sure like anyone you interview is going to have a good answer to that,
Mhm.
right? Like, did you do something smart and it worked out well? And in a way, a more interesting question is, did you do something smart and it backfired? And would you do the same thing again? And if you're kind of living into that, accountability as a leader and doing things for the right reason, that there should be things that you've done that backfired, that maybe you wish you could rewrite them, but of course you can't. So these things sort of tie together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a for anyone who's interested there, this is sort of a deep cut, but there are two um, essays that are often called the vocation lectures, by Max Weber, who's one of the founders of modern sociology. That one's called Politics as a Vocation, and one is called Science as a Vocation. And a big theme, I happened to reread both of these after quite a few years, for my work at UPenn. Um, One of the things that Weber really emphasizes about leadership is, how difficult the decisions can be, and that good leaders are willing to accept unintended consequences.
Mhm. Yeah. That's interesting. It's I think, I mean, that topic in itself, or everything we just spoke about in this last section, is something that we could probably unpack for much longer.
Yeah, and
I think there's lots
know,
to it,
there's
isn't there?
there, there's a lot to it. But maybe if there's a key insight in this, anyone who's talking to people about leadership or success. I find this to be particularly true of entrepreneurs, by the way. Like if you like, because I was an entrepreneur, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
actually multiple times, and all other entrepreneurs are going to give you, most of them will give you this story as if they did everything right,
Right.
and tell you why you should do what they did because they did everything right. Now, in fact, if you look at empirical, there's some very interesting work that's been done in Silicon Valley on startups and key success factors, and essentially what all the empirical studies are, longitudinally across a big range of startups have found is that the key factor is timing,
Right.
right? So timing, like, so to me, that's sort of like luck, and did the things that you can't control go in a favorable way? And there are also very interesting examples. One of the things I wrote about recently in one of my classes at UPenn is, you sort of think about technologies that were great, but weren't the market wasn't quite ready. And a very famous example is the Palm Pilot,
Mm.
right? Which was, the sort of the original, what they called PDA, personal digital assistant, in the late 90s, 2000s. And, it was a kind of a good technology product, but it wasn't quite the smartphone.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, I wonder, would there really have been smartphones? One, the way that they ended up being designed and going to market, and two, would they have been so successful if the groundwork hadn't been laid by the Palm Pilot and the BlackBerry, right, which is sort of an early version of that. So you can kind of see these cycles. So there's, like the Palm Pilot was an excellent product. It wasn't a blockbuster product, really, not the way that the iPhone was. And there are a number of factors to that. But I think if you look at history of technology and then you look at sort of what people are telling you about their endeavors, I think thoughtful people will try to articulate why they had good luck as well as good execution.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak from our own experience. We obviously, I started Made to See, back then it was Webinar Experts, in 2016. And for several years it went very well. We grew and things were going well, and then COVID hit. And as a company that helps other companies run webinars, the timing couldn't have been any better. Now, COVID was horrendous, obviously, and many people affected. But from a business perspective, it helped us grow even further and support our customers when they needed it, and we were well placed. But that I certainly didn't plan COVID, and I didn't plan for anything like that to happen. But the timing was fortunate from a growth perspective for us. So I completely relate to what you're saying there.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and there's a lot of in enterprise software, right? There was like this big dip, and then there was this big peak, right? Almost like the supply chain disruption. So everything, so much macroeconomic uncertainty, everything went on hold, right? And then everything came like roaring back at the end of 2020 and 2021, and certainly we saw Synity is a data services and software company in the ERP market primarily. So we saw that, very clearly, that like a lot of headwinds, of course, when the pandemic happened, but then a huge bounce back from that. Interestingly, this is sort of a major footnote for anyone who's interested. If you look back at the history of major companies, you will find that there's a correlation between certain kinds of innovation and macroeconomic crises. And of course, the reason for that is that a crisis forces you to innovate. The example that you just gave is a very good example of that, right? So, like, it was often said in 2020, 2021 that we achieved, 5, 10 years of digitization in 2 years. And that was forced by the circumstances, right? Everybody had to figure out how to work remotely. So then, what happened? Your business zoomed, right? That was, really, really like a rocket fuel for Zoom, and a number of other associated businesses like that. So, good entrepreneurs will also. This is sort of the converse of this point about luck. Will also see a crisis as an opportunity. What thing doesn't work anymore, and what's the new innovation, or what's the new product market that I can bring to a changed market, in order to create some innovation in it.
Yeah.
But I think this is all quite interesting.
Yeah.